Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. Well, as I'm sure you've already heard, Nanotyrannus is officially back. After decades of constant debate, I still can't believe we've now got very convincing evidence that this modestly sized Tyrannosaur was a genuine genus and not just juvenile Tyrannosaurus. And not just that, there seem to have been two separate species that varied in size and range. Not only does this demonstrate that the Maastrichtian Hell Creek Formation had not just one but a pair of medium-sized predatory theropods, it also throws the entire proposed growth patterns for Tyrannosaurus rex completely off balance. Where it was once thought that the tyrant lizard king underwent a very dramatic metamorphosis from slim leggy youngster to massive bruiser as it aged, this hypothesis now seems far more uncertain. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get into the incredible recent findings, let's explore the history of this genus, as well as the controversy that's haunted it from the very beginning. The Nanotyrannus holotype, a well-preserved skull known as CMNH5741, and housed at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, was found in 1949 by paleontologist David Hosbrook Dunkel. It was first scientifically described in 1946, and was considered to have been a new species of Gorgosaurus that hailed from the Lance Formation. As a result, it was assigned the name G. lancensis. The specimen would later be redescribed in 1988 by Robert Bakker, Phil Currie, and Michael Williams, who classified it as a new genus of small tyrannosaur, which they dubbed Nanotyrannus. In their paper, the authors didn't give any exact size estimates for the animal, but noted that the skull measured just 57.2 centimeters or 22.5 inches long, which is far smaller than that of any known adult Tyrannosaurus rex. Bakker et al. Also concluded that the skull bones were completely fused, which suggested that the individual would have been fully grown when it died. However, doubts about the validity of Nanotyrannus soon began to emerge, with Thomas Carr arguing in 1999 that the holotype skull simply belonged to an immature Tyrannosaurus. Later, in 2001, a new allegedly juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex specimen was uncovered from Hell Creek, formerly known as BMRP 20024.1 and nicknamed Jane. It was soon concluded that this animal was essentially the same thing as Nanotyrannus, a theory that quickly gained ground. Therefore, even to a few of its original describers, was now considered to be invalid, despite there being notable anatomical differences between the holotype skull and the Jane specimen on the one hand, and adult individuals of T-Rex on the other, with the former two having notably higher tooth counts, proportionally larger forelimbs and hands, as well as longer back legs. These were dismissed as either immature traits or taphonomic distortions of the bones. This also led to the theory that there were no mid-sized carnivorous theropods in the Hell Creek Formation, with Tyrannosaurus being such a dominant genus that its juveniles simply filled in the role of 500 kg to 2-ton predator in the ecosystem, essentially outcompeting all other rivals for this niche. Thus, for a while at least, the debate surrounding the validity of Nanotyrannus was thought to be mostly settled. However, in late 2011, news reports concerning a 2006 discovery of a new 98% complete theropod specimen that was found alongside a ceratopsid were broadcast, which I actually remember seeing at the time. Nicknamed the Dueling Dinosaurs, the specimens were discovered in Montana on land owned by two separate ranching families. Robert Bakker and Pete Larsson provided an on-site examination of the fossils, finding the pair of animals to be a Triceratops and a Nanotyrannus, the latter of which Bakker always thought to be a genuine genus. Unfortunately, the Montana Supreme Court declared that the Dueling Dinosaurs legally belonged to the Murray family, who owned part of the land on which the fossils were found, which meant that it was impossible for paleontologists to properly study it. Thankfully though, the specimens were acquired by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in 2020, allowing proper research to begin. The small Tyrannosaur received the nickname Bloody Mary, with paleontologists Lindsay Zano and James Napoli publishing a description of the animal at the end of October 2025. They found the specimen to be fully mature, being roughly 20 years old when it died, meaning that this was definitely not a juvenile Tyrannosaurus, as had sometimes been proposed. What's more, Zano and Napoli found that Bloody Mary was in fact a near-complete specimen of Nanotyrannus lancensis, the same species as represented by the holotype skull described by Bakker and Currie in 1988. In the same paper, the authors found that the aforementioned Jane specimen was not a juvenile T-Rex either, but was instead a second novel species of Nanotyrannus, Mloszewska. It was determined that the skeletally mature Bloody Mary probably measured between 5 and 6 metres or about 18 feet long, and weighed roughly 703 kilograms or 1,551 pounds. On the other hand, the Jane specimen was found to have been a subadult, yet was a bit larger at 833 kilograms or 1,835 pounds, meaning that Mloszewska was potentially the larger of the two species, although far more specimens of both would be needed to fully confirm this. Both Jane and Bloody Mary shared a pretty long and distinctive list of traits that set them apart from Tyrannosaurus. Nanotyrannus jaws were narrow and slender, being set in a skull that was far more lightly built than in T-Rex, with anterior teeth that were far smaller and more blade-like than in members of the family Tyrannosauridae. This was except for the premaxillary teeth, which were chisel-like in shape and lacked serrations. In addition, Nanotyrannus was found to have had between 16 and 18 teeth per dentary, a higher count than in any tyrannosaurid except for Alioramus and Daspletosaurus. Other interesting cranial features include the presence of an extra sinus cavity, which is not present at all in Tyrannosaurus. If Nanotyrannus was just a juvenile T-Rex, then this cavity would have to vanish and be reabsorbed as the animal reached adulthood. There is no precedent for this whatsoever in any other known species of archosaur, casting extreme doubt on the ontological variation hypothesis. Meanwhile, CT scans of the Bloody Mary skull have revealed its cranial nerves and respiratory system looked quite different from those of T-Rex. Other notable differences were present in the tail, with Nanotyrannus having 35 caudal vertebrae, as opposed to the 40 to 45 proposed for Tyrannosaurus, giving N. lancensis a proportionally shorter tail for its size. One element of the skeleton that certainly wasn't shorter were the forelimbs. While T-Rex is infamous for having puny-looking arms for the sheer size of the animal, Nanotyrannus possessed forelimbs that were both physically and proportionally longer than those of its massive cousin, with more elongated digits equipped with sharp claws. As there are no known amniotes that undergo any degree of absolute limb shrinkage, this also argues against the idea that the genus was just a juvenile T-Rex. These forelimbs would have been utilised by the predator to grab and restrain prey when hunting, allowing the jaws to get a good bite to the neck or the back of the skull. Lacking the extreme bulk of T-Rex, and possessing a much lighter frame, complete with greatly elongated hind legs, Nanotyrannus was clearly an agile pursuit predator that targeted very different prey items to its enormous contemporary, with plausible targets including animals such as Ornithomimus, Anzu, Pachycephalosaurus, as well as juveniles of larger herbivores like Triceratops and Edmontosaurus. In 2020, Aleksandra Dececchi and colleagues estimated that the Jane specimen had a maximum running speed of between 28.1 and 30.9 miles per hour, nearly twice that of an adult T-Rex. All of this leaves an interesting question. What did actual Tyrannosaurus juveniles look like? Were they still slender speed demons as were traditionally proposed, or did they more closely resemble smaller, less heavily built versions of the adults? What were the recent revelations concerning Nanotyrannus? It seems that the proposed 4-year-old specimen known as Baby Bob may be the only truly juvenile example of Tyrannosaurus rex, although please feel free to correct me in the comments if you have additional information. Sadly, Baby Bob is in private hands, even being put up for sale on eBay at one point for about $3 million. Although I'm certainly no expert, the remains of this specimen do look more like what you'd expect for a young T-Rex, being a bit closer to the adult morphology than the very slender fossils now assigned to Nanotyrannus. Additionally, in their paper describing Bloody Mary, Zano and Napoli conducted 2 phylogenetic analyses for Nanotyrannus, with the genus falling outside the family Tyrannosauridae in both, instead being placed in its own unique family dubbed Nanotyrannidae. The exact makeup of this proposed group varied in each analysis, with topology A finding that the earlier Cretaceous Tyrannosaur Moros was the sister genus to Nanotyrannus. This is interesting, as Moros was one of the earliest definitive tyrannosauroids known from North America, being native to what is now Utah circa 96.4 million years ago. It was also very small, measuring a proposed 10 feet long, with a slender build and elongated hind limbs. If this classification is correct, Nanotyrannus would possess a fairly long ghost lineage, leading back to the Cenomanian. On the other hand, Topology B instead found that the genus was closely related to two Appalachian tyrannosaurs, with these being Dryptosaurus and Appalachiosaurus respectively. I find this hypothesis to be the more plausible one, with it certainly being possible that Nanotyrannus was descended from recent Appalachian ancestors that entered Laramidia after the retreat of the interior seaway during the Maastrichtian. If true, this would also indicate that Appalachian immigrant taxa were capable of doing well in their new home, despite the presence of the formidable Tyrannosaurus. In summation then, the description of the Bloody Mary specimen represents one of those once-in-a-blue-moon discoveries that completely changes our understanding of past life. I honestly never thought that we'd get a confirmation that Nanotyrannus was a genuine taxon, but here we are, and I couldn't be happier about it honestly. It makes you wonder what other revelations will come to light in the future. Thanks for watching everyone. After watching the trailer for Prehistoric Planet Ice Age, I just knew I had to cover the giant lion-sized otter N. Hydriodon. So until then, I'll see you again soon. Cheerio.